Hello, 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 everybody. This is going to be a little different from your usual Toonkind recording. I am Mira, and I will be reading Sammy Jacks.
And hello. I am Heartless, and I will be reading for Gille Trebble.
And we say reading because we're going to be reading an RP that we did that is canon to both of our characters. And it takes place after the FPS. Uh,
Do not
um,
resist,
yes, do not resist.
and
And
before eat your heart out.
yep. So just warning you, there is a bit of angst involved because of character backstory stuff. But
This will be mostly fluffy.
yeah, because this is titled Date Night.
Sorry, I was. Yeah, yeah, date night.
All right. Since we have our intro out of the way, I believe it's your turn to start, Heart.
Oh, yes, it is. It was certainly a good thing that Gil hadn't set a time, because otherwise he would have been considered late. He got lost. He got so turned around on his way back to Barkson's apartment, he felt like the sun was laughing at him as he finally trudged up the correct stairwell. When he got to the top, he took the moment to adjust his dark orange kimono over his bright orange turtleneck, smoothing his hands over the black designs. He was wearing a nice pair of black pants that hung at his ankles, showing off the wooden sandals he was walking in. He stroked his fingers through his hair, combing any of the errant tangles that had gotten into them when he had been running. His footsteps made satisfying taps as he walked up to the door, straightening his back to look as presentable as possible. He raises up his hand and rapped his knuckles on the door.
Sammy opens the door, and it's a startling change from what the Toon normally wears. His rainbow hair is pulled back into an elaborate weaving of braids that wrap themselves into a bun, each section of hair masterfully displaying a bit of the Toon's rainbow in a bright array of colors. Gil, I didn't know when you were coming. I'm glad you made it. His voice is quiet, and he steps out fully from behind the door. His shoulders are bare, but he wore a black masked tank top and a long, form-fitting gray dress that cut off just above the knee. His shading was a warm yellow that slowly shifts to a light cherry blossom pink as he tucks a red strand of his curling hair behind his white ear. Do do you think this looks good?
Gil's orange eyes seem to light up as Sammy opens the door, his tail behind him looping around in heart shapes. He takes a slight step back to admire the full picture of his nemesis in a dress. He smiles widely, and not a malicious grin, something with more softness to it. Sammy, you look like a dream, lovely as the night is young and handsome as the moon is full. I apologize if you expected me earlier. I got a little turned around on my way here. He lifts up his arm out for his companion, Nemesis, to take, his eyes going to the cherry blossom pink shading that was slowly overtaking the warm yellow. His tail swung side to side behind him as he looked expectantly.
Sammy's shading goes a darker pink, more rose than cherry blossom, and he ducks his head a little as he takes Gil's arm. His feet are clad in black slipper-like shoes, and he slightly scuffs them against the complex's outside flooring. It's okay. I'm really glad you could make it. He looks down at Gil through his eyelashes. You think so? You really think I'm lovely? His voice is quiet, shy.
Gil's tail makes more loops behind him, a wider smile on his face. As Sammy takes his arm, he sets his other hand gently on top of it. On top of Sammy's. Oh, okay. My own mental flub. He shut
Valid.
his he shut his eyes for a moment before opening them again to smile up at him. He gently moved his hand back and forth against the Frickinelli Toon's knuckles. Yes, I meant every word I said. He swung his hips, his tail swinging around and smacking against his nemesis' butt. He puffs out his chest. Well, we should get going now, shouldn't we? Unless you have something to say to me?
Sammy squeaks, his shading turning a deep, dark pink. His gaze, however, softens as he looks at Gil. The kimono looks really good on you, Gil. The colors suit you. He hesitates for a moment, then reaches out, tucking some of the long, fiery red curls behind Gil's ear. You look really dashing. I like it. His shading has shifted to a soft, airbrushed, buttery gold and rose, and his fingers linger by Gil's cheek, as if he doesn't want to pull away.
Gil gets a wicked look to his face for a moment, before his expression changes to one of pride. He smiles for a bit, pulling up the black collar of the fancy clothing. Oh, doesn't it? Seems I just cannot get away from wearing orange. His orange eyes sparkle. He slowly blinked as Sammy tucked some of his hair behind his pointed ear, carefully reaching up to take Sammy's hand away from his cheek. He held it for a minute, before placing it on top of Sammy's other hand. Oh, enough admiring each other. I believe it is time for us to get along with this date. How do you feel about horses? He started to walk, his hand still over his nemesis's.
Horses are nice. I usually only see them in engineers' movies, though there were a lot of people who rode them when I was younger. Sammy's voice is contemplative. He blinks as Gil starts walking, and he lets his nemesis dictate the pace, content to just follow his lead. Why do you ask?
Gil carefully navigated down the stairs, his hand holding Sammy's to his arm. He listened attentively to what the other Toon was saying, his wooden shoes making satisfying clicks on the stairs. He chuckled as they reached the bottom, taking his hand away to open the door. Beyond it stood a skeletal warhorse with glowing coal feet and blazing eyes. Stopheles was dancing back and forth in place as he shook his flaming hair out. He seemed to be outfitted with a very small cart made only to carry two. I just thought that it would be nice to have a ride for a little bit. Stopheles was getting a little bit bored in the stables. He walked over to the cart, uncurling his arms from where he had been holding it, so that now he was holding both of Sammy's hands in his. His tail made loops behind him as he tilted his head up towards his nemesis, a wider grin on his face.
Sammy's eyes grow wide as he stares at the skeletal warhorse and then down at Gil, his shading a sky blue that swiftly fades into a bright highlighter yellow. Oh, that's so lovely! Thoughtfully, as you said, it's such a good idea, Gil. I love it. His hands squeeze softly against Gil's, and his gold eyes are sparkling, crinkled in a way that even with the low insight score, would be able to know that Sammy is smiling quietly, absolutely delighted.
Stopheles, gives another whinny as Sammy stares at him, puffing out a breath of smoke into the air. Gil puffs out his chest a little proudly, nodding emphatically to what Sammy's saying. Yes, Stopheles is my warhorse. Of course it's a good idea. I thought of it. Well, there's no time like the present. He releases the other Toon's hands to climb up into the cart, turning round to offer his hand to Sammy to help him up.
Sammy gratefully takes the hand, his eyes still crinkled in a wide hidden grin. He's giggling slightly, and his shading has the airbrushing of rose into his bright yellow. He sits down and smooths out the edges of his dress. He hadn't let go of your hand yet, Gil, and his fingers are edged with that same yellow-rose combination. Where are we going? Or Is that a surprise? His eyes are sparkling still.
Gil has grabbed the edge of the cart to not fall forwards as he pulled Sammy up into it, his eyebrows wrinkling together for a minute before his expression becomes pleasant again. With Sammy sitting down, the villain slid onto the seat beside him. He settles in the, beside the much taller Toon with a mischievous smile on his face. He lifted his other hand to his mouth, using his fingers to whistle. Stoffelies lets out a whinny before starting to pull the cart away from the sidewalk. We're going somewhere really nice. I hope you enjoy it, but if I told you, that would spoil the surprise. His tail curled its way around Sammy's back. His smile grew a little wider, his eyes shining with an orange glow. So, Sammy, we have some time until we get there. What would you like to talk about?
Sammy leans into Gil's side almost imperceptibly. He lets out a quiet hum, gazing down at Gil with half-mooned gold eyes. Hmm, well, what do you want to know? His fingers twine into yours, Gil. Sammy isn't wearing any sleeves like he normally does. And as you glance down, you see a strange pattern of rainbow markings encircling Sammy's wrists, moving up on his forearms, growing more and more sparse as they travel up. They don't seem like something that comes with his design. They seem deliberate.
Gil is watching Sammy, noticing how he leaned to his side, the glasses on his nose causing the glow of the orange in his eyes to seem brighter. He thinks for a moment, his eyes picking up all of the details of his nemesis, his back straightening slightly. His tail twitched back and forth, hitting against Sammy's side. He takes his other hand, reaching up to tap his lips. His mouth stretches into a smile, squeezing the hand in his grasp. You usually wear sleeves, so I've never seen your tattoos before. Do they mean anything? Do they mean something significant? I've always admired those who can sit still for the amount of time it takes to produce those wonderful works of art. I've considered getting one myself, although they seem rather expensive for a villain who can't seem to have any of his plans pull through enough. The end of his tail swung, hitting Sammy's side.
Sammy stiffens for a moment before his eyes soften. No, they're not tattoos. I wish they were. His hand is shaking against Gil's, and his grip tightens slightly on Gil's hand before relaxing. Gil, I scar with the same color of my emotions that I was feeling at the time. They're they're scars, Gil, but I think you'd look good with a tattoo. I just don't think I'd ever be able to get one. I hate needles. The last part is said with a shudder, and the shading finally shifts to purple streaked with black.
Gil's expression grew lost for a moment as Sammy says his first sentence, his eyes traveling from Sammy's face down to the marks on his arms. The grip tightening and his next words cause Gil's blood to run cold. His tail twitches violently a moment, but he managed to keep the rising anger out of his voice and out of his face. His smile faded, his expression soft and understanding. He gently rubbed his thumb across the hand in his grip, looking up into his nemesis's gold eyes. I'm sorry I didn't know. Are they why you always wear sleeves? He asked carefully, like someone crossing a patch of ice that they're not quite sure is thick enough to step on.
Sammy smiles sadly at him. Yeah, it's actually why I usually cover up all the time. I'm not ashamed of them, but showing a lot of my shading It was dangerous, but I'm safe with you, Gil, and I didn't want to hide. Not with you. He squeezes Gil's hand gently, and his shading shifts to that warm, buttery golden airbrushed rolled rose. You may be a villain, Gil, but you have standards, and I like that. I like knowing where I can stand with you. You don't. He sighs. You're not like them.
Gil grits his teeth, looking away from Sammy for a moment. His tail violently lashed beside the taller tomb, smacking him in the side again. His face still held that careful expression, but he had closed his eyes. His hand clasped together with Sammy's started to shake, his shoulders and posture rigid. You shouldn't have to hide. You shouldn't have to. He opened his eyes, looking up to Sammy. His orange eyes are alight with something new, an unfamiliar emotion upon Gil's face. There is a barely held fury showing through the cracks in his carefully constructed mask. Who are they?
A real kind named Simon Sinclair and the others in his employ, Sammy says quietly. He. I met him first on the streets when I was 10 and I didn't know any better. He was charming. I would have willingly gone to him, but he used charm person on me. I don't remember how I escaped the first time. His eyes are unfocused, but he blinks and shakes his head as if to shake off the memories.
Gil's other hand gripped into a fist, his sharp fingers digging into his palm. He ground his sharp teeth back and forth. His tail whipped around beside Sammy for a moment before he took in a breath in and let it out slowly. Pushed the anger back into his mind before gently squeezing Sammy's hand. Is that why that spell makes you so bent out of shape? He looks up at the sky as Stoffles continued to plod along. What does this Simon Sinclair look like?
I don't like when spells can affect your mind in a way that it changes how you react, forces you to trust someone when you'd never trust them in your life. I understand that using that kind of spell if your life is in danger or someone else is in danger, but in my experience, it's only been used to hurt me and others like me. I Sammy's free hand rubs at the wrist of the hand Gil is holding, expression distant. He's real kind, like I said, human, I think. He's got black hair and blue eyes, light skin. He's not like us. His design makes him look friendly. He's not. He dresses like a businessman because that's what he thinks he does. It's just business to him. He doesn't even think we're real. And none of his employees do either.
Gil looks down at his feet. He looked back up to Sammy again, giving a sharp smile. I can't do that anymore. I tried the other day when I was trying to help Bob with it, and it just didn't work. As Sammy rubs at his wrist, the purple devil toon reaches into his kimono and pulls out a notebook with pencil attached. He pulls the taller toon's hand up from where it was resting, before gently putting it on his own knee to take back his hand. He flipped to an empty page, flipping too fast for Sammy to catch any details on any of the other pages. Once there, he wrote down everything Sammy told him about this man, before starting a sketch of him off to the side. He was average, looking a little more cartoonish than Sinclair likely looked like. Sammy, are there any other sort of identifying features? Like, does his hair go a certain way? Is it curly? When I ask around about this guy, I want to get it right, or I'm just going to be running after impersonators who think they're funny. Gil looks up at Sammy at those words, wrinkling his eyebrows as his face is completely overcome with disgust. Oh, so he's one of those, is he? I'd like to see him think I'm not real when I drop him over the side of a cliff.
Sammy's breath hitches as his shading turns a rich royal purple. Gil, you have to be careful. He's dangerous. I can't lose you. Sammy is curling in on himself slightly. Not to him, please. You can't.
Gil wrinkles his eyebrows together as Sammy's shading turns, his nose wrinkling at the warnings, his tail lashed back and forth against the taller tune's side, his lips pulling back to bare his sharp teeth. And who says that I'm going to just lay down and be lost to a dreadful rape of... Okay, hold on. I have to start that over again.
You are so valid.
And who says that I'm going to go just lay down and be lost to a dreadful reprobate like him? He can't be more dangerous than the upstart demigod who stabbed me through the chest. And I'm still here. I'm still real, despite what she tried to do to me. He snapped the notebook closed, shoving it back into his dark orange kimono.
Gil, he'd try to take you and bleed you dry or send you somewhere I couldn't follow. If he gets his magic into you, you're not going to be able to say no. Gil, he used enchantment music magic on me so much my eyes changed color to reflect it. Sammy leans forward so his elbows are resting on his knees. His shading is a darkening purple. I'm not saying you'd lay down and let him hurt you, but his enchantments are strong, Gil. I don't want you to be hurt. Not for me. I'm not worth that.
Gil makes a strangled noise as Sammy talks, his orange eyes glowing brightly. He takes both of his hands and grabs onto Sammy's shoulders. He starts shaking the taller tune back and forth, his tail whipping around as it lashed against the sheet. He growled, gnashing his teeth together. Stop that! Don't you dare say that about my nemesis! You take that back, Sammy! You take it back right now!
But it's true! I'm not worth you dying over me! Sammy shoots back, his shading shifting from that dark, deep purple to the starts of an angry red. I'm not worth anyone dying over me!
Gil stops shaking him, now only gripping Sammy's arms hard. Yeah? You really think so? Who says I was going to die? Who says I was going to break the pinky promise I made, huh? Not me. As if I'd ever fall to someone's magic just like that! He snarled, pulling Sammy down into his face so that they were only a few inches apart. His brows were furrowed over his eyes, the movement having caused the cymbal hanging off of his horn to clatter against it. If you weren't worth it, Sammy, then I'd be a two-bit villain who's only good for a one-shot. I'm not. I'm not a two-bit villain. I'm a complex character with feelings all of my own, and you are my nemesis.
There are silent tears streaming down Sammy's face. He's shaking his head as if to deny Gil's declaration of his worth. But his words are gone. He's not moving in Gil's grip, not pulling away. I'm sorry. Sorry, he croaks out. He closes his gold eyes and just tries to breathe. I didn't mean... You're right. You're right. Of course you're right. His shading is a dull brown color edged with a strange gray tan.
Gil's breathing heavily, his expression turning confused as the anger leaves his face. He slowly lets go of Sammy, uncurling his pointed fingers as he calms himself down again. He withdraws even further, taking his hands into his lap. He looks away for a moment, his tail lashing back and forth behind him. He looks down at his feet, closing his eyes. This wasn't what I wanted. This was supposed to be fun. Do you still want to go where we are going with me? It was that careful but warm tone again. The shorter Toon's tail had once again rested itself around Sammy's back and beside him.
Leave, Sammy says quietly,
Oh, you cut
hesitantly reaching.
off.
Ah, peck. I don't want to leave, Sammy says quietly, hesitantly reaching out his hand to Gil, but freezing before he can touch the villain. I, I'm sorry. It's my fault. I overreacted. It can still be fun. It. I just want to spend time with you. He wipes his eyes and gives Gil a soft smile. Sorry I upset you, Gil.
He shook his head back and forth, straightening himself to sit up. He smiled warmly, his eyes opening again. Any of the anger that had been there before was gone. I'm not upset. Let's just forget this happened and have fun. Gil reached up and scratched his cheek, humming to himself for a moment. He side-eyed Sammy, a slightly mischievous look to his smile. Did Shifley tell you about your background music too? What did he say?
Okay, Sammy says softly before he tilts his head, visibly thinking. He told me I had a really nice cello.
Cello.
Cello. It always gets me how there's no ch with how they spell it.
Mm-hmm.
Always. Always.
There's no H.
Let- I know.
But you must
No
say the
H.
H like it's
I
there.
know. I know. I know. I know. Let me start that line again. He told me I had a really nice cello. His shading shifts from those muted colors to a blue tinted evergreen as he leans closer to Gil. What's yours? What'd he tell you?
The purple devil Toon smiled wider, carefully taking one of Sammy's hands to hold on to. His orange eyes seemed to glitter, his tail twitching up and down on the seat. He told me mine would be nice to dance to. A little cryptic, but everyone from the score tends to be, I think. At least they were when I was there, a long, long time ago. Gil thinks for a moment, looking ahead to where they were going. Stoffleys had continued to plod onwards, with no outward directions from the self-proclaimed villain. How did you meet him? Well, we practically beat him up.
Sammy leans against Gil, shifting to slide slightly over so he could rest his head against Gil's shoulder. Something with a good beat fits you, I think. It matches the way your voice pops. Lovely. Sammy is quiet for a long while, visibly thinking. When he speaks next, his voice is very soft. We bumped into each other, literally. Sammy's shading lightens to a yellow as a quiet giggle escapes his lips. He was so distracted. It was adorable. I had to steer him away from smacking right into a pole. His shading shifts to a more muted blue. His clothes were so damaged and torn, Gil. I took him to my apartment and fixed his clothes up, and then found out the pecker hadn't healed all the way. There's a grumble in Sammy's voice, shading slightly red. Almost pink, but not truly that shade. That fades to that dull blue before fading to a cream as he sighs. Whatever people were controlling him, they put him up to a fight that clearly he didn't win at all.
Gil's eyes flutter as he blinks to Sammy's compliment before smiling. Oh, yeah, my new umbrella. It looks like fireworks. While Sammy is thinking, the shorter devil Toon wiggles slightly to get more comfortable, tilting his head to lean against Sammy's pinned up hair. I don't know how he did that, because I just realized just now. Unless Sammy is leaning real far over to lean on Gil's shoulder.
I mean, considering their height difference, yes.
I mean, but also Sammy's legs just might be freaking too long. Anyways, hand waving for Toonkind stuff.
Yes, it works
Um,
for the shot.
he blinked owlishly, waiting for his nemesis to finish talking. His tail twitched back and forth before he laughed. Sandy only hit him once, and he flew into the wall. I specifically went after those short, disgusting wastes of space. I would have helped Bob try fixing him up if I wasn't already in a horrendous mood. He sighed, narrowing his eyes a bit. If I ever see those creatures again, they aren't leaving that encounter.
Sammy shakes his head minutely, careful not to dislodge his nemesis. I can see it sometimes. In the corners of my vision, your voice pops and sparks. It's pretty. He pauses and then sighs. Sandy is really solid. I should expect her to be a heavy hitter. She's heavy. I managed to pull her along once well, when I first met her, but I don't know if I'd be able to do it again, considering I couldn't even carry both of you last night. Sammy reaches over and moves slightly to poke Gil on the side.
Gil blinks slowly, raising his eyebrows high at Sammy's words. Oh, do you see that all the time? It is so weird. Do you ever find yourself distracted by it? He nods, up until Sammy poked him in the side. Eek! He practically squeaked and jittered at the unexpected touch, jostling the taller Toon unintentionally. Hey, I'm a lot heavier when I wear my plate, which I am almost always wearing. You can never be too careful when you have as many enemies as I do. He puffed out his cheeks for a bit, poking his nemesis back in the side. Be glad Sandy's on our side. You wouldn't like to see her truly angry. After those creatures ran, she almost beamed me with her lollipop.
It kind of flickers on and off. It can get really distracting sometimes, but it's more helpful than a hindrance, and your voice is really pretty. Sammy bursts into giggles as Gil squeaks and jolts, and then Gil pokes him back, and Sammy squeaks loudly, squirming back a bit from Gil for a fresh burst of giggles. Clearly ticklish.
Gil gets a mischievous look on his face as Sammy squirmed backwards and away from him. He gave chase, gently poking and tickling his nemesis. Oh, Sammy, Sammy, you're very ticklish, aren't you, Sammy?
No, Gil, stop, no, jiggle. Sammy squirms under Gil's tickling attention, peals of laughter falling from his lips, utterly helpless in the face of it.
Gil's grin grew wicked as he tickled Sammy for a few more minutes before withdrawing to his side of the cart. He laughed, his eyes squeezing together. I'm going to tell Chifley.
Sammy practically flung himself into Gil's lap, hanging onto his waist and kneeling on the cart's floor. No, you'll both gang up on me! His shading, though, is still a cherry yellow.
Gil sticks his tongue out at Sammy while furrowing his brow, roaring with laughter. His tail flicked playfully back and forth against the seat before he patted the taller Toon's arms. All right. Get back up on the seat. You're going to get your lovely dress dirty. It'd be a shame to have to clean it before we even get to where we are going. He giggled, grinning brightly.
Sammy takes a moment and just presses his face into Gil's stomach with a little as Gil's laughter sends fireworks through his vision. Gil pats him on the arm, and then Sammy gets an idea. He blows a raspberry into Gil's stomach. I can't do it. And then he can't make the noise. Damn it. He blows the raspberry into Gil's stomach, then scrambled back to his seat, shading highlighter yellow as he giggles maniacally.
Gil starts at Sammy as Sammy blows a raspberry in his stomach, quizzically raising an eyebrow up until the taller Toon scrambled back into his spot. He grinned widely, throwing his head back as he laughs. Oh, I have to apologize, Sammy. I'm not ticklish. That was a funny attempt. He grinned widely, kicking his legs in front of him for a moment before he wiped the tears from his eyes. Stoffelies whinnied before slowing to a stop. Pulled up alongside what seemed to be a park. The purple devil Toon's orange eyes lit up before he got to his feet, climbing down to the sidewalk. He offered a hand out to Sammy, his expression softer than it had been moments earlier. We're almost there, but we have to walk from here.
Sammy pouts at Gil at the news that his nemesis isn't ticklish at all. Boo! But Sammy quickly perks up at the new location. Oh, okay. I don't mind walking. This place looks pretty. He doesn't hesitate in taking Gil's hand, his eyes sparkling and crinkled in a grin.
Gil gently pulls Sammy out of his seat before stepping down from the cart. He smiled, his orange eyes lighting up brighter. Oh, you haven't seen anything yet. He reached forward and picked the taller Toon up around his middle, spinning around before placing Sammy back onto his feet. He took Sammy's hand again and started to pull him forward, Stoffelies giving another whinny. Gil's tail swirled back and forth, curling around in circles and hearts behind him. We'll be back later, Stoffelies. If you get bored, just do loops around the park or something. The skeletal warhorse gives a derisive snort. Derisive?
Yeah, I
Derisive?
think that's it. Derisive?
Derisive
I don't know.
snort, shaking his fiery mane back and forth.
Sammy practically swoons as he spun around, his shading pink and his face burning. But the hot pink is soon overtaken by the sheer bright yellow that's so saturated it's a highlight against the porcelain white. He's easy to lead, his face visibly dreamy, and little pink hearts trailing behind him.
They pass through the archway, and in the way of cartoons, all other sounds fall away, the only audible ones being the quiet hush of the park, all covered in snow still. Gil only slowed down as they got far enough from the entrance to need to cross a covered bridge, his shoes clacking against the wooden slats. He paused right in the middle of the bridge, looking up and back at Sammy. Close your eyes, Sammy. The purple devil Toon's tone was soft, his expression promising only good things if Sammy followed the direction.
Sammy's heart is pounding in his chest as he closes his eyes with a hum. His shading is a burnished yellow.
Gil smiles as Sammy's eyes close before turning towards the end of the covered bridge. He gently led the taller Toon over the bridge, and then they turned right. There was the sound of rustling leaves and a snap as Sammy stepped on a branch. He giggled under his breath as he led his nemesis in a couple of directions, looking back each time to make sure his companion still hadn't opened his eyes. We're almost there. Don't open them yet, he said, genuinely pleased with himself.
Okay, okay, Sammy says, giggling. His heart is racing in his chest, and he can't stop the grin that's spreading under his mask.
After a few more twists and turns, Sammy would feel Gil place his hands on his chest. All right, we're here. Uh, Wait a few seconds, okay? He lets go of the taller Toon's hand, slinking away from him. There's the sound of a match being struck, the hiss of the flame coming to life. Okay, open your eyes. When Sammy does, he will see a picnic table that is covered in a rich red cloth. There are two candles upon the table, which are now lit. There are two fancy metal covers set up on either side of the table, with eating utensils on either side. The table seems to be sitting in a secluded tree grove, the trees spookily blocking out the light by how they bent inwards. This caused the near twilight atmosphere, despite it being still afternoon and a long time away from when the sun would set. Gil was sitting on the opposite bench from where Sammy was standing, a smile on his face as he waited.
Sammy's shading goes sky blue, and then the brightest yellow Gil has ever seen. Oh, oh, Gil, this is wonderful. His eyes are shining in the firelight, and you don't even need insight to know that Sammy is absolutely delighted. He approaches Gil and carefully sits across from him. Gil, thank you.
Gil's orange eyes twinkle with light as he straightens up in his seat, his tail tapping against the bench noticeably. He smiles widely as Sammy comes over and sits down, pressing his fingertips together. He chuckled softly, turning his head to the side. His long red hair shifted around, the cymbal hanging from his horn clattering against it. I'm glad you are enjoying so far, but it is about time that we had dinner. The self-proclaimed villain reached forward and picked up the fancy cover, revealing what was underneath. The sizzling steak was accompanied by warm rice and a couple of garnish pieces. Steam seemed to rise from the food in a huge puff, and it certainly smelled delicious. Sammy would find a similar spread of food underneath his own cover.
Sammy just takes a moment to look at Gil, resting his chin in the palm of his hand. You're amazing, Gil, he says softly. His shading is now a buttery gold and airbrushed rose.
Gil blinks, looking up from the meal he had taken care to make earlier that day. He'd been taking notes from what Marcel usually made and had gotten at least some success. He tasted the rice because the instructions had said to do so. It hadn't been crunchy like the last time he tried to make rice. He stared at Sammy for a moment, his usual bravado having vanished at the softly spoken words and the soft expression on his nemesis's face. Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be? He said, recovering soon after that unexpected crack in his mask. He straightened his back and placed a hand on his puffed out chest, smiling like someone who knows they're amazing. I cooked these meals myself without any outside help. Don't wait to eat, you wouldn't want it to get cold. Gil picked up his fork and steak knife himself, starting to cut into his steak. He smiled across the table, his orange eyes glowing. Sammy, what's your favorite food to eat? I kind of just picked mine because I didn't know yours before.
Sammy's eyes crinkle at Gil's confident response, and he lifts the cover off to reveal something that makes his mouth water immediately. But at Gil's question, Sammy blinks, humming to himself as he thinks. Oh. He'd started to cut up his own food, but he pauses, setting the utensils down. I don't really know. I Food is good. I didn't really have a lot of chances to figure out what was my favorite. Before Barkson took me and Coda in, I just kinda had to eat whatever I could find. But Barkson showed me spaghetti and pancakes. and lots of stuff that are really good. I don't know if I can choose. There's so much out there.
Gil tilted his head to the side, finishing cutting his own piece as Sammy talks. He moves the piece to his mouth and pulls it off of his fork, enjoying it as he listens. He swallows before cutting more of the steak. Oh, you'll probably figure it out eventually. I know I absolutely hate caviar. It's one of the fanciest dishes you could have, but I can't get past its texture. Ugh. He makes a face of disgust for a moment before going back to looking pleased. He popped another chunk of steak into his mouth, shredding it with his sharp teeth.
Sammy nods and continues to cut up the steak into smaller bite-sized pieces. I do know what I really can't stand, he says softly. Real kind food. It just doesn't settle right. My parents would throw big parties for the local real kind in the summer. All the food for weeks would just be one fancy real kind dish after another. Sammy's shading briefly turns to a dull, dirty green before shifting back to a more light yellow. He moves to take a bite. There's a weird flicker in your nemesis frame rate for a second, Gil, but you can't see what it was. You blink, and the steak on the you blink, and the steak on Sammy's fork is gone, and he's now chewing. His eyes are crinkled, nearly half shut in half moons, and his shading is a deep yellow now.
Gil tilted his head to the side, his eyes traveling up into the trees for a moment. He chewed through another piece before swallowing. When I was younger, we had some food from Feruma. I don't know what the big deal was. It wasn't as savory as any of the dishes made in Gibli. It was okay. He gave a little shrug, cutting another piece off of the steak. He smiled widely as Sammy's eyes crinkled, noticing that Sammy was chewing. Oh, so your mask isn't a part of your design. I was kind of wondering.
Gillian food is good! Sammy perks up. I don't have a favorite, but growing up, I always appreciated coming home after spending summer out in. He trails off, shading flickering blue as Gil comments on the mask. No, it's not. Yeah, it's not part of my design.
Gil's tail thumped behind him, his orange eyes sparkling. Yeah, it's cool. You remind me of one of my favorite villains. Well, I suppose maybe he was more of an anti hero. It was, I think it was a movie called The Spirit of Tezukanda. The main character left his life as an honorable warrior to stop savages from overtaking his home. Everyone around him disapproved of his methods, but he was the one who kept their town free. He swallowed another piece of meat, his tail twirling around behind him. You know, when my family and I got to Ghibli, we attended the Chihiro Festival. Bob had these gold tickets, and it let us into the banquet. I missed eating that well. The purple devil let out a dreamy sigh.
Sammy tilts his head at the plot line. I did leave home, but Sammy sighs, shaking his head. It doesn't matter. I can't go back. Do you want to tell me more about your stay in Ghibli? It sounds like you had a lot of fun. I miss being over there. Toontown is nice, and I've met wonderful people, but Ghibli is where I grew up. I wonder how it's changed in the 8 years I've been gone. Then Sammy does something interesting, his eyes taking in the secluded nature of this part of the park. He reaches up and tugs down his mask. He looks vulnerable, shy, a light cherry blossom pink in shading. I trust you, Gil, he quietly says.
Gil looked up at Sammy as he said those words about home, slowly nodding. He placed another piece of steak into his mouth, listening and watching the taller tune. He tilts his head to the side, his long red hair shifting along with the tilt. He swallowed and watched as Sammy pulls down his mask. He blinked, reaching up and scratching at his face. Okay, you trust me. That's good. He sounds mildly mystified, cutting off more pieces of steak. About the Ghibli trip, well, the day we got there went alright. Fortunately, we hadn't gotten there quick enough to see any of the performances that they had. We pretty much got there on the last day, but attractions were still set up. Sandy broke the strength based game. It was hilarious. He grinned widely, more thumping sounds coming from his bench.
You two mentioned that they were the same kind of strength game at the carnival. We broke them. Sammy giggles. And yeah, I do trust you. And fun to be around. You're mischievous and gleeful, and you wouldn't hurt me. Not on purpose. And I can talk to you. You're nice to talk to. Sammy's shading has slowly started to turn more and more saturated pink as he keeps talking.
Gil nodded, scooping up some of the rice and putting that in along with another piece of meat. He reached into his kimono and pulled out a handkerchief, carefully dabbing at his mouth with it. Yeah, the ones we broke at the carnival were the same. He fluttered his eyelashes as Sammy clarified, tilting his head to the side as Sammy started to turn more and more pink. He raised his eyebrows upward, his glowing orange eyes looking back and forth over the taller Toon across from him. He reached up, brushing his hair back from his face. Well, it wouldn't do for me to actually hurt you. At least not something that couldn't be healed right away. Getting hurt isn't fun. The self-proclaimed villain tilted his head to the side, setting his eating utensils down beside his plate. You're fun to be around too, Sammy. I really feel like I can talk to you as well. I certainly hadn't told anyone else about the closet. He chuckled warmly, closing his eyes for a moment. He picked up his utensils again, quickly and neatly getting more food into his mouth.
I haven't even told Chifley who hurt me, Sammy says softly. Barkson and Coda know because they rescued me, but you're the first person I've told. Sammy takes another bite of his food. And Gil, you notice that Sammy's teeth are sharp, like yours. No wonder he hasn't complained about how rare the meat is like you suspect Marcel would.
Gil swallows, the orange glow to his eyes brightening. Well, I'm glad that you told me. He watches Sammy for a little bit, his mouth widening. A mischievous look appears on his face before he lowers his eyelids and leans forward slightly. It's kind of sad that you hide your beautiful face behind your mask all the time. I would love to see it more often.
Sammy freezes, his fork loaded with food halfway from his plate to his mouth. His gold eyes are wide as his shading goes pink, a blush spreading to match it until his face is completely colored. I, if, thanks. Maybe not in public, but Sammy dissolves into quiet mumbles, his face burning.
Gil chuckled softly under his breath, his orange eyes twinkling at Sammy's response. Of course, of course. After all, in public is different. He set about eating more of his food, watching his nemesis with a delightfully smarmy grin on his face.
Very visible that Sammy is blushing heavily as he shoves his next few bites into his mouth. Gil, you're pretty too, he finally says softly. I'm glad you don't need to hide anything about yourself.
With about 3/4 of his plate gone, Gil straightens up and whips his hair back and forth. Of course I am. I've charmed people with only my words into doing whatever I want. I'm just that good. He took another bite. He swallowed and looked at Sammy. Oh, I don't hide my looks unless I really don't want any of those annoying bounty hunters to bother me that day. Somehow they already got the fact that I've had a design change. Ugh.
Sammy lets out a little hum. I don't really know how to do that. The best I can pull off is, well, googly eyes. And, well, they already know what I look like. Not like I hid very well.
Hmm. Gil let out a hum as he finished another bite of his meal. He gave a mischievous smile toward Sammy. Well, you could always let me dress you up in a disguise. I happen to be the best at disguises.
Sammy's returning smile was soft and extremely affectionate as he ducks his head shyly. As long as you didn't make me look stupid, I'd let you do anything to help. I I don't want them to take me again. He set the silverware down by this point and is rubbing at his wrist with his left hand.
Gil looks offended at the very idea that he would make Sammy look stupid. He places a hand on his chest, his mouth opening slightly. You offend me, as if I would ever make you look stupid. That would be an offense to all masters of disguise everywhere. If anything, I would make you so unrecognizable even your own mother wouldn't know you. His eyes trailed down to Sammy's wrist, noting that he was rubbing it again. He hummed before smiling. I was going to tell you about Gille, wasn't I? Did you know that Sandy's never seen fireworks before then? It was her first time seeing fireworks, and we watched it from the balcony of the bathhouse. She was awe-inspired.
I think I've changed enough. I don't think she'd recognize me anyways, Sammy says softly, before his shading lightens to a yellow. Ghibli fireworks were always amazing. I never got to see the summer ones. Those were supposed to be the best ones all year. Miss Nana told me that she'd find a way to take me one if we got back in time, but the fire happened before that could happen. And they told me to run, and I haven't stopped, at least not until I got to Toontown.
Gil nods to the statement, but doesn't comment. He's been through a redesign himself. His own birth family wouldn't recognize him anyways. He started to eat again before Sammy started talking about a fire. He paused, with the food halfway to his mouth, his eyelashes fluttering. He puts the bite of food down, tilting his head to the side as he let his hand lean against the table. Yeah, the ones during the Shihiro Festival are always amazing to watch. You mentioned a fire. I'm sorry to hear that your home burned down. The self-proclaimed villain reached up and scratched at his cheek, a thoughtful look on his face.
Don't know who started it, but I know it was arson. Sammy's voice is dark, shading briefly a deep, bright red. But he shakes his head and it fades to a pale cream. Sorry. I keep saying depressing things. The steak is really good, Gil. I don't usually get meat like this. It's really nice to have a change of pace. He takes another bite and his shading goes yellow as he chews, a little delighted wiggle in his seat.
Gil nods before waving his hand back and forth. It's perfectly understandable, and I asked, don't apologize. He leaned forward, his orange eyes sparkling as he widened them. There's a swishing sound from behind him. Are you serious? I have been practicing and watching Marcel to brush up on my own skills. It was really hard, and I kept making the meat too brown. The other days, sometimes it came out black.
Everyone makes them too brown, Sammy complains, pouting. I can tell you really put a lot of effort into these too. Sammy puts another bite of steak and rice into his mouth and wiggles more in his seat, yellow shading spreading as he lets out a pleased hum. It's really good.
Gil puffs out his chest proudly, his eyes sparkling. Of course I did. I don't do anything halfway. I am so glad you have impeccable taste. He takes another few scoops of his food, chewing thoughtfully and swallowing. Do you want to hear the story of how he basically overthrew a government? It's a really great one. And it all started with me sneaking into Bob's suitcase because some of the things he was saying didn't sound quite right.
Sammy's shading goes pink, and then his eyes go wide as Gill's later words hit, shading shifting sky blue. You overthrew a government? He squeaks.
Gil grins proudly, puffing up his chest at the squeak. His orange eyes glowed almost like embers. Hell yeah, we did! I mean, the government of No Man's was actually a company called No Man's Inc., but we all led a revolution against the head honcho of the company. You should have seen Bob talking to all the other misprints. He did such a good job. Very inspirational, if I do say so myself. There's light thumping behind him as he took another bite of his food.
No Man's Incorporated, Sammy murmurs. I met Bob outside one of Prismatone's shrines. He mentioned being a nobody. Is that why? His eyebrows are creased, his shading a slightly darker shade of blue airbrushed with a light purple.
Gil raised his eyebrows, placing his fork down on his mostly empty plate. He waved his hands back and forth in front of him, shaking his head. No, 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 not nobody. Nobody. Capitalized. They're a type of tune that are made from a printer with paper. The leader of the company, Amelia, had the wrong idea about all of them. She thought it was normal to not have feelings or anything unique about herself, and she was forcing that view onto other people. We put a stop to that, and now they print misprints exclusively. He held up his hands to do air quotes when he said misprints.
Oh, oops. Nobody. His mouth twists around the word and he grimaces as if it tastes foul. But he shakes his head and the expression eases. Sammy's shoulders relax, the color fading to a soft yellow. I'm glad you put a stop to it, he softly says. Feelings, they should be treasured, even if they hurt. His thumb is rubbing at his wrist.
He closed his eyes for a moment, making a self-satisfied sigh. He opened his eyes again, grinning at Sammy. I'm so glad you feel the same way. Gil falls silent as he starts to finish up his food, a smile still on his face.
Sammy quietly hums, and his expression softens at Gil's clear approval. Me too, he softly says. He eats some more of his steak, his plate nearly empty when he looks back at Gil. You've had a lot of adventures, haven't you, Gil? He says. A lot more than me. I think the only thing that might be even slightly compare is, well, I don't know if that even counts considering. He trails off into a quiet mumble, shoving the last few bites of steak into his mouth. His shading is turning hot pink.
Gil put the last bite of his food into his mouth, his smile wide as Sammy spoke. He swallowed before placing down his eating utensil and carefully dabbing at his mouth. He placed his handkerchief back into the pocket, sewn into his kimono. Well, to be honest, it really seems like Marcel's patron is out to send him through every problem that could ever be in the area, and some that aren't. He glances up towards the sky. I'm kidding! I'm kidding, really. He looks back to Sammy, smiling widely. Well, there's no saying you can't have more adventures in the future. Psychopomp knows I won't stop with my shenanigans.
Shenanigans, Gil, Sammy says softly. You're fun to chase.
Can
And
you say that over again? You cut out for me.
yeah, that's fine. I like your shenanigans, Gil, Sammy says softly. You're fun to chase. And if we got to go on adventures together, I don't think I'd mind it. And, Sammy looks like he's considering something, the pink still very strong on his shading and face. He gets up from his seat and approaches his nemesis with a little determined step on his face. And then, faster than Gil could move away, Sammy bent down and pecked him on the cheek. I like your laugh, he says as he backs away, face flaming.
He smiled widely at Sammy's words, his orange eyes glittering. Oh, you'd hang your hat up on your side of the law to have adventures with me? Gil cackled slightly until Sammy got out of his seat, the purple devil toon tilting his head as he watched his nemesis move around the table. He blinked once as Sammy kissed him, and then retreated, his hand going to his cheek. His orange eyes glowed softly, his smile becoming a lot softer. As the taller toon attempted to get further away, he stood up and caught Sammy's hand. Sammy, I like your eyes. I like your smile. I like the pretty shades of color you turn, even if I don't always understand them. I like you. Gil lifted the hand caught in his to his mouth, gently pressing a tender kiss to the back of Sammy's hand.
Sammy stood frozen, gold eyes wide and glittering as Gil presses a kiss to the back of his hand. His shading is vibrant fluorescent pink, but it's shifting to a golden rose as he reaches out to intertwine his hands with Gil's. I like you too, he says hoarsely, swallowing dryly. I like your hair. The way you grin mischievously at me makes my heart do funny things, and you he's clearly fumbling for words. I like you, he says near helplessly. I just want to be with you. I he trails off, blushing furiously and sharp teeth worrying at his lower lip.
Gil lifts his opposite hand, weaving his fingers between Sammy's. He listened to his nemesis stutter, watching the way he spoke, his orange eyes zeroing in on where he was worrying against his lip. The soft smile didn't leave as he took Sammy's left hand and placed it on his own middle. He carefully walked his fingers up Sammy's arm, resting his hand as high up as he could reach. A mischievous glint dances through his eyes, his tail looping around behind him and forming hearts. Sammy, could you come down here for a second? You're too tall for me to reach you.
Sammy's breath is non-existent in his lungs as Gil walks his fingers up his arm. That mischievous glint in Gil's eyes makes Sammy's heart stutter and stop. He doesn't even care if Gil's teasing. He's too enthralled by his smile, the way his eyes shine in the dim lighting, mischievous and bold, and the golden rose saturating as he slowly leans down.
It almost feels as if the whole world has stopped, holding their breath in this moment as Sammy gets even closer. Gil walks his fingers up to his nemesis' shoulder before he lifts his hand and presses a finger against Sammy's lower lip. You really shouldn't worry at your lips with how sharp your teeth are. They won't be as soft later. He draws his hand away from the taller toon's lips, drawing one of his fingers along Sammy's jawline. The moment is broken by the purple devil's laughter as he suddenly turned to smoke, misty stepping to the other side of the table. Not hungry anymore?
Sammy takes a breath, his eyes wide and his shading pink, pink, pink. No, I'm, I'm full. His voice is very breathy, and he slowly straightens up in a daze. It was really tasty. The plate is practically scraped clean. Congratulations, Gil. You've succeeded in pleasantly blue screening your nemesis.
Gil picks up the plate, walking over to his side of the table and finishing up the last bit of his own food. He placed it on top of the plate, leaning forward to pull out a picnic basket from underneath the table. He placed the plates away before kicking the picnic basket back under the table. He looked up to Sammy, smiling mischievously as he watched how Sammy stood there. He tilted his head to the side, his tail looping around itself back and forth behind him. Sammy, are you alright? You're just standing there. If you're not careful, you might get kidnapped. He chuckled, his eyes glittering.
Sammy blinks, his eyes traveling to Gil. There's a subtle flinch and shiver that travels up Sammy's spine, his shading briefly shifting to purple before it fades back to pink. If it was you, Gil, I wouldn't mind. His voice is still airy, but there is a faint tremor there. He blinks a few more times, hand rubbing his wrist. If it was you, he trails off, flushing.
Gil paused, the smile sliding off of his face at the shift to purple and the flinch. He carefully walked over to Sammy, reaching out to gently take his hand away from his wrist. He looked up into the taller tune's face, the mischievous smile. Bleh. The mischievous smile returning. We'd have to talk to Chifley about that, wouldn't we? It could be fun, one day. Flip the script. He chuckled, his tail doing loops behind him again. So, Sammy, what do you want to do now? Or do you want to go back home?
Flipping the script, Sammy says thoughtfully, blinking down at Gil as he gently takes Sammy's hand away from his wrist. I don't really want to go home, he softly says. Going home means this is over. And I want to stay with you as long as possible. A pout is growing on his face. Gil, your nemesis is very expressive without his mask.
Gil smiled wryly, glancing over to the candles on the table. He looked back up to Sammy, his eyes glittering. His tail did loops around behind him before he lifted the captured hand to his mouth again, pressing his lips to the back of it. We still have to walk back to the entrance of the park and then wait for Stoffles to come back with our ride. It's not quite over yet. He withdrew from Sammy and walked back to the table, quickly blowing out the candles. He picked up the cloth and started to fold it over the candles, which seemed to disappear as if they were a part of the fabric, instead of actual objects. I just want to make sure to pack this up so I don't lose it.
Sammy's mind short-circuited again as Gil's lips pressed against his knuckles. His knees are weak, and his shading is cherry blossom and rose, and it takes all of his strength not to just swoon dreamily after the villain. Little hearts starting to float after behind him.
Gil finished folding the cloth into a neat square, lifting it and placing it into the folds of his kimono. He reached down and pulled up the picnic basket, pressing it to flatten it. That also went into his hammer space before he brushed off his hands. He looked back and up to Sammy, raising his eyebrows towards the floating hearts behind the taller tune. He sauntered back over and took both of his nemesis's hands, running his thumb over Sammy's knuckles. Sammy, hello? Ein Quill to Sammy. Come in, Space Cadet. If you don't want to go home, what do you want to do instead?
Sammy blinks back to himself as several of the hearts pop. A few stubborn ones catching in the elaborate updo of his rainbow hair. Sorry. Uh, maybe a walk? I want to be by you. For as long as you want me to. He ducks his head shyly, visibly blushing. The toes of his black boot slightly dig into the ground and wiggles there. It's very clear he's out of his depth, but is so deeply earnest to stay by Gil's side.
Gil hummed, his smile growing slightly as Sammy managed to get out what he wanted to say. He looked over the now empty picnic table and around to the enclosed clearing. He looked back up to the taller tune, pulling only one of his hands away. I suppose we could walk around the park a couple of times. It's a shame that you will probably want to pull up your mask again and hide your handsome face.
Sammy's face is pink, pink, pink as he swings their clasped hands lightly. You'll see it more times. Don't worry. His shading turns orange and he brings up the hand that he's holding with Gil and presses a quick kiss against Gil's knuckles, giggling.
Gil chuckled, his eyes glittering as his tail loops around behind him again. He smiled wider as Sammy kissed the back of his knuckles, giving the hand and his a squeeze. Promise I will. I don't know if I will ever survive if you don't. He dramatically put his other hand to his head, pretending to feel faint. He seemed to swoon for a moment, before straightening up again.
Sammy's giggles don't stop, but actually increase, his shading shifting to a bright sunshine yellow. I promise, I promise. He grins against Gil's hand, still holding it close to his lips. I love your laugh. He kisses Gil's hand again. It makes my vision light up with swirls of fireworks and sparks. He gently tilts Gil's hand to kiss his wrist. It's orange, red, and violet bursting from popped bubbles, so like many ripples in a sunset sky, I can't help but love it the more I hear it. He kisses Gil's palm.
Gil grinned wider as Sammy promised, his orange eyes glowing brighter. I'll hold you to that. As his nemesis started to kiss his hand, peppering him with compliments and carrying on, it only served to soften his smile. His tail whipped back and forth before he gently smoothed the pads of his fingers against the taller tune's cheek. So are we going to stand here all day till it gets cold? Although I don't see that happening anytime soon. Definitely not with you around.
Sammy leans into the gesture, his yellow shaded hand reaching up to catch his nemesis' hand and hold it there for a moment. We can stop walking.
We can
Damn
stop
it.
walking. Sad thing, Sammy doesn't want to start walking. He just wants to stop.
We can. Hmm. I mean, he really doesn't want to have the date be over, I'll be real. Okay. We can start walking, he softly says. I will need to put my mask on again. I just wanted. He trails off with a sigh, squeezing Gil's fingers. Damn you, Sinclair, and all you're like, he quietly murmurs before shaking his head, trying to smile at Gil. It doesn't make his eyes crinkle.
Gil took his unoccupied hand, reaching up to tap at his lips. I understand. Maybe next time, instead of going out where people could happen upon us, we could go somewhere quiet. Somewhere out of the way that nobody would think to look. I have just the place. His orange eyes glittered as his smile gained an edge of mischievousness. He didn't move, didn't pull away from the taller tune. He felt his heart hammering in his chest, hoping that he was doing this right. Gently moved his fingers against. Wow. Okay. He gently moved his fingers up and down against and across Sammy's cheek. His tail made a long looping heart behind him as he stared up at his nemesis.
Sammy looks at Gil, and his shading shifts to a creamy yellow, and his voice is quiet and full of hope. Yeah? I'd I'd like that a lot, Gil. Sammy's golden eyes flutter at the gentle caress of his nemesis, and he can't help but lean in at the touch, a soft, gentle smile on his lips as the emotion displayed becomes real, the edges of his eyes crinkling with the genuineness. Whatever Gil was doing, it was right with Sammy.
The purple devil tune's tail swished back and forth, the heart still forming into it as he listened to Sammy's words. He slowly nodded, his orange eyes glowing softly. Yeah, it's this old abandoned theater I found. Nobody had been there for ages, so if we went there, nobody would bother us. I really think you'll like the place. Gil chuckles underneath his breath, his smile causing his eyes to become less pointed for a moment. He left his hand there for a moment longer, eyes gliding over Sammy's face, like he was memorizing how the taller Toon looked in that moment. He slowly pulled his hand away, straightening his kimono and his back. He smiled, walking over to the other side of Sammy and capturing his arm. We should get to walking. Starfleas might get antsy if we keep him too long.
Sammy's eyes visibly light up at the words abandoned theater, a delighted gasp escaping his lips. An abandoned theater? Where? I've been all over Toontown trying to find all of them. Some of them have prismatone shrines that I need to take care of. I know I haven't found them all. Briefly, his shading flickers as a deep blue before his shading shifts back to a bright sunny yellow. His head follows Gill's trailing fingers for a moment, his eyes closing in content, happy little sigh. Sammy leans into Gill's space as his nemesis catches his arm. I suppose we wouldn't want that, he sighs and reaches up to fix his mask back over his face. He'd take revenge and make it the ride bumpy, wouldn't he? His eyes are crinkled in a hidden grin, his tone teasing and light.
Gil's expression grew smug as Sammy asks about the abandoned theater, his tail looping around back and forth behind him. Oh, you'll have to wait. It wouldn't be much of a fun surprise if I told you right now. His tail looped around behind him, curling briefly around the taller Toon's leg. He waited as his nemesis fixed his mask, tapping his fingers in a pattern against the arm he had captured. Gill's grin widening. Of course he would. He's quite the fiendish creature after all. With everything in place, Gill's hand slipped to holding Sammy's rather than his arm. The self-proclaimed villain started forward along the path they had come, taking it slow. Hey, Sammy, if you were to make an altar to Prismatone, what kind of items would you put on it?
Sammy's breath sucked into his chest, Gill's tail briefly wrapped around his leg, cutting off the playful pout that was about to escape. His face turns pink, blush melding with pink shading. It takes him a moment to formulate any sort of response, letting himself be guided forward by Gill's slow pace. If I was making an altar to her. Sammy makes a soft thinking noise. I'd give her one of my paintings. Um, Maybe flowers? I know she likes those. Little trinkets that make me think of her. Like the rainbow crabs from the carnival. Sammy started to swing their clasped hands slightly, his shading brightening to sunshine yellow again.
He tilts his head to the side, his holy symbol clattering against his horn. So, something you made, flowers because she likes them, and things that make you think of her. Gil makes a considering noise, twirling his mustache with his unoccupied hand. The trail away from the picnic basket was made of smooth gray pebbles, a lantern set to hang from a tree every once in a while. If Sammy, bleh, if Sammy looked ahead, he would see that it twisted around the thickly enclosed trees, turning out of sight. Gil's tail twitched back and forth behind him, his pointed ears twitching as well. I've just been thinking about making something for Psychopomp. Correction, I have done more than just thinking about it. I've never actually seen an altar before, so I thought I would ask you what you would do for Prismatone.
Sammy makes a quiet squeak of delight. Oh, that's lovely, Gil! I'm sure Psychopomp will like whatever you make, because it's you, and it's made from you. It's honestly one of the more meaningful gifts a person can give their patrons. At least, that's what I think. His voice is soft, and he squeezes Gil's hand. If you make Psychopomp something because you want to, then It'll be something worth more than anything money can buy.
Hold on a minute. Gil's eyes brighten up considerably at the praise, his grin growing wider. You really think so? He hasn't been talking to me for a long while now, and a little bird told me that I should make him one. She said that it might help. I know that sometimes he gets all incorporeal and isn't even able to manifest, so maybe that has been happening? The purple devil toon looks ahead, his eyes getting a thoughtful and far off look. He's never been silent for this long before. I hope he hasn't actually been mad at me this whole time.
Sammy squeezes Gil's hand again. If our little bird told you, she's probably right, he says softly. She's got a pretty good insight on how souls work after all, and I don't really see why he'd be mad, because he has you. You're really great after all. And, well, if he is mad, then maybe Prismotone can talk to him? Find out why he's been so silent.
Hmm. Gil hums, looking back to Sammy. His expression is pretty indecipherable, but he quickly smiles again. Oh, I wouldn't worry about it. He'll come back around. I'm the only one he's got right now, after all. Not for lack of trying on my part. Maybe I should change my tactics, make few haunted houses, or scaring people more. That's always a lot of fun.
Sammy's shading turns blue at the mention of Gil being the only one Psychopomp had, before lightening to an excited yellow at Gil's musings and snickering. I think Psychopomp sounds like it could make a really good patron of tricksters and people who like a fun scare. If you made flyers for a scare house and dedicated it all for Psychopomp, I think that would make a really good project. Almost like a temple, but for spooks and scares where people can get scared for fun instead of just worship. His eyes crinkle to golden half moons and a clear hidden grin. I'd love to visit it if you made one, Gil. Maybe you'd smoke Maybe you'd spook me enough for me to yell. But I don't know if you could manage that. His voice is full of teasing and playful challenge, daring Gil to try in the future. But he brings Gil's hand up to his masked lips and presses a kiss to his nemesis's knuckles, softening his words even more.
Hmm. Gil hummed to that, his orange eyes sparkling with mischief. That's a fantastic idea. I have an idea for the place, although I would have to probably buy it from whoever actually owns it. He trailed off into muttering to himself about deeds to houses and land and how Gisnip's realtor market worked. Or works. He doesn't know. His pointed ears twitched as Sammy continued, a wide grin appearing on his face. Oh, is that a challenge? I feel like you'll regret putting me up to that. I once scared the police chief so bad he had to take a week off from work. The purple devil toon cackled, the light from his eyes becoming softer. They both turned the corner along the twisting path, encountering a bridge over a frozen river. It was the same bridge that Gil had asked Sammy to close his eyes at. Beyond it was the entrance, and a counting Stopheles waiting at the curb.
Sammy burst into giggles at Gil's challenging grin, the noise only muffled by the fact that he'd kept Gil's hand close to his face. Then I just need you to comfort me after, he says, pressing another masked kiss to Gil's hand. Can't have your nemesis too traumatized. Where would we stand on our chases then? As Gil cackles, it sends shooting sparks of color from the corners of Sammy's vision, and the visible features of his face soften as gold and rose color his shading. Sammy quietly sighs at seeing the entrance. Is it bad if I don't want today to end? He softly says.
Gil's tail twirled back and forth behind him, unintentionally rising up to wrap around Sammy's hips for a moment. He considered what his nemesis was saying, his long eyelashes fluttering. Perhaps I would have to do that. Can't have you not wanting to chase me. Who would stop me if I decided to take over all of Toontown? He snickered, his step quickening to a short skip for a little bit. He rubs his thumb over the taller Toon's knuckles before pulling their joined hands towards his mouth. Gil kissed the back of Sammy's hand, his mustache tickling the bare skin. Well, if it doesn't end today, we can't have more days where we do stuff like this, right? There's always going to be more dates, Sammy. I'm not going to stop unless you want me to.
Oh, so scary. The great Gil Trebble is an overlord to Toontown? Perish the thought. Sammy's voice is full of absolute amusement, glee, and challenge, his shading orange and gold. His shading shifts back to gold and rose as Gil kisses his hand. I don't want you to, Sammy says softly, and then reaches out his free hand to push some strands of Gil's fiery mane of red hair out from his sharp face. Tucking it behind a pointed ear, his fingers trail down from his hair and trace Gil's jaw as if memorizing it. I want to keep spending time with you, chasing you, walking with you. His eyes dart to Gil's face and then away as the pink saturates to a highlight. Kissing you.
Gil let out a short cackle at Sammy's words, at the challenge in them. His orange eyes glowed brightly as he squeezed them shut for a moment. He opened them just in time to catch a shift in colors, the softness of Sammy's voice as he reached up and traced along his jawline. His eyes fluttered, the mysteries of how his nemesis was feeling right now escaping him. Why would Sammy want to keep doing that? What did Sammy see in him? That being questioned, what did any of them see in him? Only a soft smile touched his face at the words, his orange eyes glittering. Well, we've got plenty of time for that. I'm not available next weekend. I've got something important to do. But maybe the weekend after. Or even maybe after you stop me from stealing some pompous, rich person's art piece. Which is what I'm doing next week, by the way. His wooden sandals tapped against the wood of the bridge.
Sammy's eyes are glittering, golden motes of delight and challenge and daring. Oh, an art piece. What should I get? What would I get if I did manage to get you? His fingers walk across Gil's shoulders, up his neck to poke at Gil's sharp nose, and he snickers.
Gil wrinkled his nose a little at the poke before he quirked an eyebrow upwards. The feeling of his nemesis' fingers walking along his skin would have caused his breathing to pick up if he wasn't keeping a careful control of it all. His tail swirled around behind him before snapping against Sammy's backside. Maybe a dance, Or maybe you want to kiss. You keep talking about kissing me. Gil's steps become more graceful for a moment, like he had been about to twirl Sammy around, but thought better of it. His light steps off of the bridge almost elicited no sound, the soft crunch of gravel beneath the wooden slacks the only indication of the self-proclaimed villain's passage.
What if both? Sammy said mischievously, his shading orange, and then he laughs as Gil's tail smacks him. You're so good at skipping away into the night after all. It would have to take extra luck for me to catch you. I think I deserve a big reward. But if you got away, what would you want? You'd be winning that time. Would the painting really be worth it if you slipped out of my fingers? Sammy batted his eyelashes at Gil.
The purple devil's eyes glittered, a wicked smile stretching the edges of his mouth. He practically pranced forwards, lifting his chin up high at the praise of his skills. His tail twitched up and down behind him, and he placed his unoccupied hand on his mustache, twirling it again. I suppose both would be a sufficient reward for capturing me. Gil tilted his head in thought at what Sammy was suggesting, a hum leaving his lips. His tail looped around behind him, forming a heart. Well, that is the thing, isn't it? I got away with it, so the stakes get higher. Besides, I just plan on selling that painting for its monetary value, and what we have is worth much more than that, isn't it?
Worth way more than a ceiling painting, Sammy agreed, squeezing Gil's hand before visibly pouting at Gil. But Gil, don't you want to kiss me? He bats his eyelashes again, his eyes crinkled half moons. Wouldn't that be a fun bonus to winning? A painting and a kiss from your nemesis?
He pauses right before the card, turning to face Sammy. Gil's smile became softer as he looked up into his nemesis's beautiful golden eyes. He pressed a finger to his lips, humming thoughtfully. His tail swung back and forth behind him, sinuously forming hearts along his length. His eyes grew soft as he held his nemesis's hand, lifting it to his mouth to plant a sweet kiss against his knuckles. How about if I get away? You meet me under the moonlight the day afterwards, in a dark, secluded place, tucked away from the world. And then he wiggled his finger, indicating that Sammy should lean over.
And then Sammy breathes as he leans over, his shading such a rich, buttery gold and airbrushed rose. His heart is pounding at what his nemesis is suggesting, anticipation making butterflies flutter in his stomach. He can't look away from Gil, watching as his orange eyes glitter and shine with bated breath. He's doomed, he knows. His heart already so masterfully stolen by the purple thief holding his hand. A cunning and devious tune, who Sammy couldn't help but just be entirely wrapped up in and around his sharp fingers.
Gil reached up with his opposite hand, gently tracing the edge of Sammy's mask. His eyes seemed to grow in size as he moved his hand, smoothing his palm over the taller tune's cheek. He leaned up on his tiptoes, getting so close, only a couple of inches away. He tilted his head and whispered in the other's ear, "And only then will I steal a kiss from you." He danced backwards from his nemesis, letting go of his hand as he laughed. He hopped up onto the two-person cart, offering a hand out to help Sammy up. "We should probably go before the owner of this cart finally figures out where it's gone."
Sammy's heart practically stops at the idea and he swoons, clearly and visibly, little hearts starting to drift off of him in drifting, floating waves. His shading is a warm gradient of pinks, and it takes him a full minute to even register the outstretched hand, which he takes. As he starts to get in, he lets out a spluttering giggle at the news that the cart was stolen. Gil! Sammy is, of course, not surprised in the slightest.
"What? You didn't think a villain like me had the money or the time to acquire our mode of transportation legally, did you?" Gil helped Sammy up into the seat beside him, quickly swiping away the sweat from his brow with the effort. It wouldn't do to let his nemesis know that he had worked up a sweat with something as simple as that. He looked to the skeletal horse, who whinnied before starting to pull away from the curb again. "Sammy, I've had a great time tonight. I cannot wait to see you again." He tilted his head towards the taller tune, letting his hair flow around his shoulder to give a more alluring pose. "Sammy, you would notice a slight discordance. Like Gil wasn't sure he was doing the right thing here, or like he was mimicking something he had seen on the big screen. It came in the subtle way that Gil kept looking all over Sammy's face, trying to figure out how the other was reacting to his actions.
Sammy softens completely, the uncertainty reflected back, and he reaches out and takes Gil's hands in his, gently squeezing them. He bends forward and presses his forehead against Gil's. I have too, Gil, he quietly says, a soft confession told to a lover and a partner. I've done so much to make this night something I'll never forget. It. I've never been on a date before. No one's taken me out to dinner or a walk in the park or anything close to this. No one has ever gotten close to do so. It wasn't safe before. This was special. Really special. Thank you. He pulls back only slightly and kisses Gil on the forehead, smoothing that fiery hair away from a beautiful and clever face. You're something amazing, Gil. Thank you for letting me see it. Thank you for letting me be close to you like this. Thank you for trusting me. It's honestly the best gift you could have given me.
Gil's eyes grow glossy as Sammy leaned forwards and pressed their foreheads together. He blinked a couple of times, taken aback by the soft confession. He looked back and forth over his nemesis' face, his eyes wide. The orange glowed softly against his black sclera, the act that he had been putting on having dissolved completely. His eyelashes fluttered, his hand resting over his heart. He recovered after a few seconds, a soft and a smile coming to his face. It's a shame that you've never been on a date before. Do you want to know a secret? He raised his eyebrows and tilted his head the other way, a more natural pose than he had before.
Always, Sammy says softly, tapping his chest with one hand. I'll keep it here, safe and tucked away against my heart. If you don't want it getting out, it won't come from me.
Gil smiled a little wider before looking down at his lap. He looked back up at Sammy's face, his tail curling around behind him. This is the first time I've been on a date before, and I'm really glad that it was with you.
Sammy leans forward, intertwining his hands with Gil's, and brings them into his lap, gently squeezing. He again presses his forehead against Gil's, giggling. Me too. I'm glad it was you, Gil. We can be each other's first date. It's our little secret.
Gil laughed softly, his tail making loops and looping hearts behind him. He squeezed Sammy's hands back, his eyes squeezing tight, soaking in his nemesis's giggling. He opened his eyes again and looked out, noticing how Stoffles was starting to slow down in his gait. A flicker of disappointment went through his features as they pulled up alongside Barkson's apartment building. He looked back and smiled up at Sammy, his orange irises glittering. Yeah, our little secret.
That same flicker of disappointment fills Sammy, but he reaches down and cups Gil's face in his hands and gently presses one final kiss to his nemesis's forehead, smoothing away flyaway hairs and tracing his cheeks with his thumbs. There are so many words boiling up in his chest that he wants to say, so many things he still wants to do with Gil. But he's home. Barkson and Coda will be waiting. And there is the promise of another meeting, another chance of kisses and soft words and gentle gestures after an exciting chase to see who wins against the other. Sammy swallows words he's not ready to say yet, the relationship too fledgling, too new, his emotions too big to put into words he wants to say. His shading is a soft, cherry blossom with airbrushed rose, and he drinks in his nemesis's appearance in for the last time of the night, like he's drowning on dry land. I'll see you for that painting, Gil, he finally says.
I wouldn't expect anything less, Sammy. Gil watches Sammy leave. His heart squeezes in his chest as the door closes behind his nemesis. He told himself that this wouldn't be the last time they would see each other like this. Once Stopheles had started away, he reached up and brushed his fingers over where the taller Toon had kissed him, a soft expression coming to his face. His heart was pounding in his chest. He felt more alive than he had being chased through the museum. The last time I felt like this. He puts it out of his mind as Stopheles goes around the bend in the road. And that is the end of our date night.
I hope you had fun listening to this read aloud.
Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
Bye.